Please feel free to have the tea and cake. There's no formalities, even in the middle of class. You can come up and get some. So let's just start again. I wanted to give a quick introduction to what we're trying to aim to do in this class. Now this is the 4th session, alhamdulillah. The aim is to continue for 10 sessions and hopefully reach the end of Surah Al-Baqarah. Every class we're going through 5 pages of the Holy Quran, as much as we can in 5 pages. We're following this internationally used Quran that Muslims all around the world, all Muslims all around the world use. I know a lot of the copies of this Quran that we have the name of like the Saudi king on it. This one, if I open it here, it says that this is like a gift from Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, Malik Fahad bin Abdul Aziz. But that, as Shias, that shouldn't deter us from using this Quran. This kind of script is now used across the Muslim world. Even other countries print Qurans with the same script. It's known as Uthman Taha. There's different versions of the Uthman Taha script, but one of the commonalities is that the same text that is on a certain page is going to be the same text no matter which version of the Uthman Taha Quran you pick up. So for example, page 16 to 20 would be the exact same on any Quran that is Uthman Taha. So it's somehow, internationally accepted as a common version of the Holy Quran. We're just trying to, as much as possible, go through the meaning of these verses on 5 pages a week. Discuss anything as much as we can, things that are a bit hard to understand, clarify them. If there are any questions, feel free to raise them. Also, there are notes that we are working on that I've shared with you guys. There's a Google Drive document. Definitely take a look at that. That Google Drive document has a lot of additional points that we're not going to get time to go through in this 1 hour. But for example, simple tafsir points, ahadith that are relevant, or even lessons, practical lessons that we can take away from verses of the Quran. Also, again, I want to reiterate that I am totally open to questions, comments. Even though the class is big, it would be very good if there is interaction and, you share your thoughts. I'd forgotten that in the first session, there were 2 questions to do with Surah Al-Hamd that I had asked a friend about. One of them, Misam, you had asked, and one, Brother Ali, you had asked. So I think your question was about Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim, whether it can mean keep us on the straight path as opposed to guide us. And I asked somebody, they said definitely that's the case. I asked somebody who's worked in the tafsir of Surah Al-Hamd. They said that from a kind of philosophical perspective, the way we look at all of the creation is that God is constantly sustaining the creation and giving all the perfection that the creation has is constantly being given by Allah. So in the same way that any kind of perfection we have is constantly being given to us by Allah, same thing with guidance. So it's not the case that, okay, we're guided and that's it, we don't need God anymore. Definitely, constantly Allah needs to keep us on that straight path, if we are even on the straight path. The second question, even Mason, that you had asked about the, i'rab of Sirat al-Ladina an'amta alayhim ghayr al-maghlubi alayhim wal-dhalin. Again, the person I spoke to, he agreed. He said Ayatollah Jawadi also mentions that these are 2 different characteristics of the same path. The path of al-Ladina an'amta alayhim, that is the same path that it's the same path that we're talking about, that is the path of this group that you have favored, and that is also the path of those people who have not gone astray and are not those that Allah is upset with. Something like that. Okay. So I spoke to somebody called Sheikh Fazl Abbas Kanji, who has gone through all of the tafsir of Ayatollah Jawadi for Surah Al-Hamd, which is a very, very detailed tafsir. Okay, so today, inshallah, we'll look at page 16 to 20. Just very quickly, some of the concepts that will come up that we might get a chance to discuss. And the first one, I'm going to go into a bit of detail from a fiqhi perspective, is that of magic. So a few of the concepts that will come up in these pages. In the very beginning, there's a discussion of Prophet Sulaiman. So in a continuation of the discussion that is addressing the Bani Israel. So now it's been many pages, like maybe 5, 6, 7 pages, that the Quran has been addressing the Bani Israel and reminding them of all the favors that Allah gave them and how they constantly disobeyed, how they constantly gave, problems to the prophets that were sent to them. And in that regard, there is a story of Prophet Sulaiman that is mentioned. It's interesting to note that in the Sunni books of tafsir, there is a lot of amazing, strange, and definitely fabricated stories that are mentioned under this verse. Stories about how, the jinn stole the ring of Prophet Sulaiman and they ruled on his throne for 40 days, and Harut and Marut were angels that sinned and did all kinds of bad things. Anyways, we don't accept any of these narrations or any of these accounts. The accepted version is that the Bani Israel had they were practicing magic. And there were two sources from which they were taught magic. One was that there were shayateen that are mentioned in the verse that we're starting with. So I think you guys can see the screen, right? I'll load up the verses. So yeah, the shayateen that I mentioned, the devils, they were maybe jinn or maybe human beings that were teaching magic to the Bani Israel. And during the time of Prophet Sulaiman, he somehow put an end to that. He stopped what they were doing and he hid their teachings. He all their paper, all their literature that they had written about about magic, he gathered it and he kept it somewhere safe. He didn't destroy it, but he kept it somewhere safe. After he died, again, this magic was somehow accessed and it was spread amongst the Bani Israel. And not only was this magic again spread, but people were accusing Prophet Sulaiman of being a magician, that he was not really a prophet. All those amazing miracles that he had, all that power that he had, they were saying it wasn't because of any kind of miracle from Allah, it was magic. Anyways, in that context, again, Allah sent two angels to teach the Bani Israel magic to somehow counter the magic that was being done against them. So there was so much chaos and magic was being practiced by people to harm, as is mentioned in this verse, to even cause division between a husband and a wife. And so to somehow protect the innocent Bani Israel who wanted to be protected from this, two angels called Harut and Marut were sent to teach them magic in the sense of countering that dangerous or the bad magic that was being done against them. But again, these angels, they taught, in order to counter the magic, they had to teach magic to the Bani Israel. And so they did so with a warning that comes in this verse, that they would learn, what does it say? The angels would say that we are only a test, so do not be faithless. And apparently, again, many of those people who were taught magic, again, misused it and they abused that knowledge. So very quickly, I want to just quickly mention what is magic from a fiqhi perspective and quote one hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and then we'll move on. So in a fiqhi perspective, under the discussion of magic, 5 different subjects are discussed. One of them is magic that is haram, known in Arabic as sihr. What is the definition of that? It has to do with apparently tricking somebody's senses into seeing something or perceiving something that didn't really occur. But more than that, it's also it's done with the power of jinn. Okay, so if you go to a 3D movie and you're tricked into thinking that you're going up and down when you're not going up and down, that's not magic, that's not haram. That's just a 3D movie, right? But here it's through the power of jinn that this magician, he does something, apparently he has to commit very filthy crimes in order to get an ability to have power over the jinn or be in touch with the jinn, and he can use the power of the jinn to then deceive other people and make them see things that they don't really see. When I was in Iran, we once had a presentation by like one of the, I don't know, Revolutionary Guards or one of the policemen who was giving us an account of like a Sufi group, not a good Sufi group, like a really bad Sufi group that had been put an end to, like they had been arrested, they had been stopped. And the head of that group, when he was put in jail, they realized that if he had a Quran, he had special powers. And when they took the Quran away from him, he no longer had those powers. And he was doing some like ihanat to the Quran. He was putting blood on it, or he was tearing it, or he was doing something very bad to the Quran, and that gave him these kind of powers. This was told to us in Iran. Anyways, there is this idea of somehow they do something that gives them the ability to be in touch with the jinn, and then they can carry out these acts of black magic. So that is definitely haram. It's equated to kufr in this ayat that we're looking at, and even in other ahadith. Similarly, there is something else called kahana, which is also haram. Kahana means that it's like you're predicting the future, or you're saying definitely this will happen in the future, but again by using the power of jinn. So something very similar to black magic or sihr. As opposed to that, in fiqh, we have discussions of other things that are not, at least contemporary maraja, they don't say that straight up these other things are haram. One of them is known as sha'bada, which in English I think we would call it, I was looking up the word, legerdemain. Okay, it's basically legerdemain. Basically, it's like this idea of, like moving your hand so quickly. You're not doing anything supernatural, but you're tricking other people by having practiced some special movements, or, like, I don't know. My son was recently, like, what he did was somebody taught him this, where he attached like nuts in something to his hand. Like there was a container with nuts that was in his sleeve, and so when he would shake a container, it would sound like there was something in it, and he would trick people. So he would like shake it with this hand, and it would sound like there's something in it, and then he would move it around, and then shake it with the other hand, and it would be empty. Okay? So that would fall probably under sha'bada, which is, according to Ayatollah Sistani, according to many contemporary maraja, it's not haram. Okay? Tanjim is the idea of astronomy. Again, astronomy, we have strong hadith against it, which one of which I'll read for you. But the idea is that maraja generally, as far as I've seen, maraja say that to believe in astronomy independently, that the stars are the cause of what happens in the earth. When the solar system is aligned in a certain way, then war will happen or plague will happen. And that is the independent cause. Without keeping Allah in the picture, that is haram. But to believe in it otherwise, to say that, okay, Allah has created the system in a certain way that the stars can tell us something about the reality, but I'm not ruling out the fact that, giving sadaqah and doing dua is still effective, that is apparently not haram. And I'll read a hadith about that. The last one is qiyafa. Qiyafa again is like looking at somebody's face and being able to read certain realities about them by looking at them, looking at their hand. Again, with certain conditions, it's not blanket haram. It's qiyafa. Okay, so that was some fiqhi discussion.
Just a quick question. Yeah. Going back to number 4, astronomy is like how people do horoscopes and all that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll read a hadith that like generally we have advice against it, but the way the Maraja understand that is that it's not a blanket haram thing. There is some reality there, but people who study this, they definitely cannot say with certainty that something is going to happen. Yeah? And so to believe in it with that kind of limited belief, and with this idea of tawheed, that at the end of the day Allah is in charge of everything, it's not haram apparently.
So on that same notion, so we can perhaps understand that these things do impact and have an impact, but
right.
Of course they're not independent. Because my thought was always like when they look at constellations and things like that,
right.
It really doesn't have an impact on perhaps the future or on events in our day and life.
Right.
But that's not necessarily the case.
No. Apparently it has some reality, but we have this in hadith that like the people who study this, they don't know the complete picture of exactly what is going to happen. And if we look at this hadith, so in Nahj al-Balagha, there's a very interesting story where somebody, one of the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen, when Amir al-Mu'mineen was going to go out to fight the Khawarij in the battle of Nahrawan, somebody came to him and said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, in sirta fi hadha al-waqt khashitu an la tadfar bi muradik min tariq ilm al-nujum. That, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, if you go right now to fight, I'm worried that you won't win because of astronomy. Like astronomic calculations are telling me that you're going to lose. So very strongly, Amir al-Mu'mineen said that, do you think that you can tell the time when a man goes out and no evil befalls him? Or do you think that you can warn of the time at which one goes out and harm will happen to him, basically? Whoever testifies to this falsifies the Quran. So somebody who believes in nujum is doing takdeeb of the Holy Quran and becomes unmindful of Allah in achieving his desired objective and in warding off the undesirable. Anyways, so that's just a good kind of source of how Amir al-Mu'mineen was rejecting it. He went on, Amir al-Mu'mineen then addressed the people and he said, beware of learning nujum, except that which is kind of used for guidance. You know, the navigating in the seas, you want to know like which way you're going back in the olden days. Okay, so let's go back to the Holy Quran now. So this was the first verse in page 16 was looking at this story of Sulaiman.
If we look to the first one of these five, the sihr, the magic one, right? This is
Yeah.
the one I think that like maybe most people think of this when they think of like black magic or dark magic or
Right.
even evil eye or I don't know these things. I feel like Allah put these references in the Quran here and in other places like to make us realize this is a real thing. But how prevalent is it really? Like, is it worth it to go through life being worried about this type of thing? I know especially like for example, if a baby is born or someone's going to get married, like people are really like cautious that, oh, they're going to get evil eye or something. I don't know.
Right.
And I think especially in Sunnis, they have like a lot of ruqya and like jinn,
Right.
Like removing jinns from possessing people and stuff like that. Is that something that like is this real? Like
So we have these things in Islam as well, like certain du'as to stop magic, and we have this verse in the Holy Quran, وَإِنْ يَكَادُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ. This idea of like the evil eye. It's definitely a reality, but in Islam we're told that like the course of action to counter it is primarily having taqwa, relying on Allah, asking Allah for help. If we look at this verse that we're looking at, it says, وَمَا هُمْ, these magicians, وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِينَ مِنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, that they could not harm anyone except with Allah's leave, with Allah's permission. Or in that hadith we're looking at from Amir al-Mu'mineen, he told the people, like, don't worry about this astronomer, and he said, Siru ala ismillah, go forward to war with the name of Allah. And you know the war of Nahrawan, Imam Ali won it like so strongly, like all of the enemy were killed except for a few of them. So I think that's the Islamic advice, is that it's a reality, but the answer lies in taqwa, and the answer lies in asking Allah for help and sadaqah and these kind of things.
Just a question on the actual verse, the two angels that came, do we have any information on how they appeared? Like, were they in human form, and were they known to be angels by the people?
So in philosophy, we have this idea that like angels cannot just come, they're not a physical being. It's not the case that like if an angel is in front of us, everybody can see him. You know, when that angel comes to Bibi Maryam in the Quran, it says, فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا. It's like, it's almost like a dream. They're in a different world. Somebody who has entered that world can see the angel. Or even at times, maybe people who are not pure, somehow like they are able to see that, but it's not in the physical world that they're seeing that. So we have stories about like the blessed head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that at nighttime went on that journey to Sham. At nighttime, like angels would come, and even the army of Yazid would see those angels. So we have to explain that somehow using Islamic philosophy, which in Islamic philosophy we say that these are not material beings. It's not like a physical material thing. In that regard, though, let me just quickly check. There's a website I was looking at about Harut and Marut, a Shia website.
I wanted to ask, you know that verse about angels visiting Prophet Ibrahim.
Right.
What about that?
Yeah. Somehow it would have to be explained, using I think it would be something along these lines that the Prophet Ibrahim, even his wife, it's not the case that they didn't. The Quran is telling us reality that they spoke to those angels, but it wasn't a physical encounter where they were speaking the normal way we would speak with one another. Anyways, I don't know right now off the top of my head. Some of these historical details, they may even be different accounts. Apparently it was after Sulaiman alayhi salam. And like I said, there's a lot of fantasy stories about these two individuals as well that have been mentioned. Apparently they're mentioned in Christian and Jewish sources as well, Harut and Marut. Okay, so let's continue. So that was the first verse. Then after that, it's just saying that, had the Bani Israel been faithful, so they were basically accusing Sulaiman of kufr, right? So had they, instead of that, followed what they were told to follow, been faithful, had taqwa, then they would have been rewarded. Okay, after that, in verse number 104, there is a reference to another story about how during the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, the Bani Israel were mocking the Holy Prophet with a certain word. They were taking advantage of a certain word. The Muslims, when the Prophet would be explaining to them the Quran or the teachings of Islam, at times in order to request the Prophet to speak a little bit slowly, they would say ra'ina. Ra'ina means consider us, take us into account. Ra'ayat means consideration, to take care of somebody. So consider us, go slowly. But it can also be used for another word. The same ra'ina can be used from a different Arabic root word to somehow be an insult. That you are idiot, for example. You are a stupid person. So the Bani Israel used to say that same word intending that meaning. Or they used to stretch the ya to say ra'ina. Ra'ina means our shepherd. Ra'i is like a shepherd of sheep. Anyways, the point was that they were taking advantage of that word, and so Allah tells the Muslims that don't say the word ra'ina anymore. If you want to say this to the Prophet, use another word, unzurna. Unzurna has that same meaning of look at us, consider us. Unzurna wasma'u. No, just unzurna actually. Wasma'u is the word wasma'u here is not what the Muslims should say. It's what Allah is telling the believers. Anyways, that was just one point. Then at the end of the next, at the end of this page, so in the next verse and in the beginning of the next page, it's somehow looking at this. A lot of these verses in these pages are somehow looking at the Muslims as opposed to the Christians and the Bani Israel. Okay, this is very interesting that reading these verses, I feel, would give Muslims a lot of strength and identity, and realize how Allah takes this very seriously, that the Bani Israel, the Christians, are a different community that are not going to listen to us, are not going to always, want to love us. Look at this verse. It says, neither the faithless from among the people of the book nor the idolaters like that any good be showered on you from your Lord. So they're not happy that the Muslims, that the Holy Prophet should be given a certain khair, goodness. But it's up to Allah. Allah will decide who will get His mercy. Apparently we have in hadith that this rahmah that is mentioned here, Wallahu yakhtassu bi rahmatihi man yasha', that Allah will single out for His mercy whomever He wishes. It refers to prophethood. So that Allah will send the prophethood to whoever He wants, even if it's not somebody from the Bani Israel. And then as maybe a continuation of that, on the top of page 17, verse 106, it's now saying that we do not abrogate anything except that we bring something better than it. So this is maybe a reference in continuation of that idea of the Quran and Islam coming. It's a reference to maybe how the Quran and Islam is abrogating the previous religions. But in any case, this is another discussion that I wrote here that like is a lengthy discussion in the study of the Quran. That which verses are abrogating other verses. Nasikh and mansukh. The verses that are abrogating means like it's like nullifying the previous verses, are called nasikh, and the ones that are nullified and no longer relevant are called mansukh. It's a discussion in al-Quran. It's also a discussion in usul al-fiqh, that some of the sharia has been abrogated by other parts of the sharia. There's of course different discussions, different theories. For example, there are verses of the Holy Quran about alcohol that would appear to indicate that alcohol was made to be prohibited in different stages. First, it was like, okay, don't pray namaz when you're drunk, and maybe there's another level I'm forgetting, and then finally it was like all out, or interest. Initially, compound interest maybe was forbidden. Ad'afan muda'afa, it's there in one verse of the Quran, and then the time came when totally all kinds of interest were forbidden, usury. However, not everybody accepts these. These are all discussions. Apparently, Ayatollah Khou'i, rahmatullah alayh, he used to say that all of these apparently nasikh and mansukh verses, he used to give some kind of explanation for them and say it's not really any naskh that happened. There's no abrogation. The only one verse that he accepted was to do with this thing of like you have to give sadaqah when you want to go visit the Holy Prophet. So there's a surah called Surah Mujadila, surah number 58 of the Holy Quran. In verse 12 and verse 13, it talks about that before, O believers, before you go visit the Prophet, give some sadaqah. And then in the next verse, it says, okay, since nobody was giving sadaqah, it's okay, you don't need to do it anymore. So apparently, Ayatollah Khou'i used to say that's the only example that he actually accepted of nasikh and mansukh in the Holy Quran. Anyways, that's just one discussion. Okay, moving on to verse 107 and 108. Again, it's saying verse 107, it says that everything in the heavens and the earth belongs to Allah. In verse 108, it says that it's somehow rebuking the mushrikun, the Quraysh, the followers, the people in Makkah, that Medina, that do you want to ask your prophet the same way Musa was asked? So in different verses of the Quran, we have accounts of this, that the mushrikun would come and request all kinds of ridiculous miracles. They would say that, why don't you bring like a book down from the heavens? Why don't you show us Allah? Why don't you show us the angels? Why don't you have like a house full of wealth and gold? Okay? And so apparently even the Bani Israel were asking such ridiculous things from Nabi Musa. And the important lesson here is that although miracles are a reality, that prophets of Allah would come with a miracle to prove the divine nature and the truth of their message, it wasn't the case that the prophets would always have to just respond to any silly request. The point of the miracle was to prove that this is the truth. When that proof had been shown, it wasn't the case that the prophet had to always come up with another miracle and any kind of silly request would be entertained. Okay, again in the verse 109, it's just showing how we should recognize that they're not all of these Ahlul Kitab are our friends. It says that many of the people of the book are eager to turn you into unbelievers after your faith. They have this jealousy towards you. But interestingly enough, here it's saying that right now is not the time to fight them. Okay, so in verse 109, it says, فَعَفُوا وَاصْفَحُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ. That recognize that the people of the book are your enemy, but right now, show patience until the verdict of Allah comes, until Allah issues His edict that, there will be war. So right now is not the time to fight, is what the Muslims are being told. Instead, right now, they have to somehow work on themselves, strengthen their relationship with Allah. أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Okay, then, in this verse 110, there is a reference to something called tajassumul a'mal, that whatever you do in the hereafter will be shown to you. It says, any good that you send ahead for your own souls, you shall find it with Allah. This was another point that I put here, another discussion, that this is something that we see in many verses of the Quran and many ahadith, that there is a reality to our actions. The idea of you must have heard that there's a story of one of the wives of the Holy Prophet who was once backbiting. And then the Prophet of Allah told her, spit it out. And she spat it out, and there was meat that was in her mouth that came out. Many ahadith like that talk about, this one was actually, so going back to my point about Islamic philosophy, this one would be even harder to explain using philosophy, because now somehow that metaphysical reality, that immaterial reality of that sin, by the power of the Prophet, it was brought into this world. It was a kind of miracle where it had a material reality. Anyways, the point is this, that our actions have a reality in another world. And on the Day of Judgment, in the hereafter, we will see that reality. And that's what this verse is indicating, that any good that you send ahead for your souls, you shall find it with Allah. Yeah.
This is going to go too much off topic, you don't have to answer it, but what's the benefit of having this belief in tajassum al-a'mal versus not believing in tajassum al-a'mal, but believing that we'll be accounted for every action we perform at the end? And why do we need to know that it exists right now as a reality?
One thing is that Islam and these Islamic sciences like philosophy, they want to help us to identify and unveil what is the truth, what is a reality. So even if there was no practical benefit, which we can contemplate and probably bring practical benefits, even if there wasn't, we want to recognize the reality of how everything works. And so in that sense itself, it's got a theoretical benefit, right? But more than that, I think there is this kind of grave threat, and it becomes more serious when you think of it like that I am forming my own soul, I'm forming my reality, and I'm making myself into somebody very filthy. I know that's one thing that comes to mind. Maybe if others have any other comments, or even yourself, if you can think of other things. I searched Tajassum al-A'mal and I got some poetry of Rumi as well. I thought I'd just read it. These poets, these Farsi poets, it's a very beautiful, kind of interesting field, Persian poetry. Many of these Persian poets were great scholars and very spiritual personalities who, in very beautiful Farsi, they have explained these complicated Islamic concepts. So Rumi, in one of his poems, he's talking about this idea of tajassum al-a'mal, and he says, Ey darida pustina Yusufan, gorg barkhiz as in khab kiran. That you who was you had the qualities of those brothers of Yusuf, you were somebody who was tearing apart people like a wolf. What is this? The wolf that apparently tore apart Yusuf. Maybe he's making a reference to the brothers, but the point is, somebody who did those kind of bad actions, on the Day of Judgment, you will be raised as a wolf. Gorg barkhiz. Gashteg gorgan yek be yek khuhay to mi daranad az qazab a'zay to. That your qualities, khu means akhlaq, your qualities became like a wolf, and they were tearing apart your body parts, meaning your reality, your soul was being torn apart by these bad akhlaq that you had. Anyways, okay, let's go back to these verses. So that was verse number 110. Now in verse number 111 and 112, again it's talking about how the Bani Israel had this idea that they're the only ones who will go to paradise. Okay, they said straight up that no one will enter paradise except somebody who is a Jew or a Christian. لن يدخل الجنة إلا من كان هودا أو نصارى. Allah says this is like just a false hope of theirs. They should bring evidence, which apparently means that like bring something from the Torah or the Injil. If this is true, then it should be there in these divine scriptures. But it's not. On the contrary, Allah says, whoever submits to Allah, whoever does amal وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ, so he submits to Allah and he's a good person, that will be somebody who goes to paradise. Okay, the next verse, number 113, is talking about how the Bani Israel and the Jews, the Christians themselves, they don't accept one another's religion, which is very strange because they are reading divine books. وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابَ. I thought maybe it means that they both have the same exact book, because they both, I think even the Christians believe in the Old Testament, right? The Torah. But maybe, yeah, that's how it's been translated here as well, though they follow the same book. But the way I was looking in the tafasir, it was explaining it as they both read a divine book. So the idea is that they both are somehow connected to a divine source that should validate each other's religion. The divine source of the Bani Israel should have told them that, okay, Isa is going to come, and it had described to them who Isa was. The Jews should not be rejecting Nabi Isa. Similarly, the followers of Nabi Isa, the Christians, they definitely should believe in the divinity and the prophethood of Nabi Musa. So this idea of them rejecting one another doesn't make any sense. Here on this page, in two different places, the mushrikun are apparently being referred to when it says الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. So it says that the Christians and the Jews, they both reject one another, and even the mushrikun come and reject religion. Okay? So said those who had no knowledge. كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Those people who have no knowledge apparently here means the mushrikun of the time of the Holy Prophet. Also they came forward and rejected the divine religions. And Allah will judge between them on the Day of Judgment. The next verse is interesting. It's talking about how masajid of Allah have somehow been stopped. Like some people had stopped the name of Allah being remembered in masajid. And Allah is saying, what worse kind of oppression can be done than that? And what exactly does that mean? I saw different explanations that maybe it refers specifically to Masjidul Haram, that the kuffar of Makkah did not let the Muslims pray, for example, in Masjidul Haram. Or no, maybe it just means the earth, like we have in hadith that all of the earth is a masjid, okay, like a place of sajda. Maybe it means generally like the kuffar who stopped the name of Allah, stopped the religion of Allah from being mentioned in the earth, they have done the greatest of all oppressions. وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا. They strive to destroy and ruin the masajid. These people, their punishment should be that they don't get to enter the masajid except that they are in fear. That's what it says. أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَنْ يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. And for them there is a disgrace in this world and the hereafter. Again, different explanations maybe for what exactly this means. We can also think of it ourselves, try to think of what it might mean. But yeah, that's what it's saying, that who is doing something worse than those people who stopped the name of Allah from being remembered in the masajid? And these people should be made to be scared when they come to the masajid.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
When it says wasa'at fi kharabiha, means trying to destroy it, do they mean that they're actually destroying it, or do they mean that just not having the names of Allah being mentioned there is destroying that? Is the kharabiha
Yeah. I think definitely I saw this, that kharabiha doesn't necessarily mean physical destruction. It can even be a kind of corruption of the true message of Allah. That if you are somehow, stopping the message of Allah from being remembered properly in the masajid, that would be a kind of takhrib. Yeah. Okay, so anyways, moving on. Then it says, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبِ. For Allah has, like, to Allah belongs all that is in the east and the west. Perhaps this is a continuation of the previous verse. So if the kuffar are stopping the Muslims from remembering Allah in the masajid, then they shouldn't give up. The Muslims shouldn't give up, and they should recognize and realize that Allah is in charge of everything. If we can't remember Him in the masjid, we can remember Him anywhere else. So that's a kind of beautiful way to continue verse 115 after 114. But yeah, the verse is saying that to Allah belongs the east and the west. Whichever way you turn, there is the face of Allah. And it goes on to say that these people, the Bani Israel, the Christians, even the mushrikun, they all did this shirk of attributing a child to Allah. The Christians said that Isa was the son of Allah. The Bani Israel, one of their prophets or one of their holy figures called Uzair, Ezra in English, apparently they called him, in another verse we have that they called him the son of Allah. Or the mushrikun at the time of the Prophet, apparently they said that the angels are the daughters of Allah. Okay, so they had this belief in Allah, but it was mixed with shirk. And so here Allah is saying Subhanahu, He is much beyond that. He is glorified, immaculate, beyond that. Rather, He is in charge. لَهُ بَلْ لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كُلٌّ لَهُ قَانِتُونَ بَدِيعُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Badi' apparently means somebody who creates without any precedent, without anybody else who had done anything like that before. The originator of the heavens and the earth. إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُونُ. In verse 118, it's somehow saying that again, the mushrikun are being referred to as people who have no knowledge. They're saying that, okay, if the revelation descends on the Holy Prophet ﷺ, why doesn't it come to us? لولا يكلمنا الله أو تأتينا آية. Why don't miracles come to us? And again, Allah is saying that the Bani Israel had said something like that as well. So this is the second place on the same page where we are seeing that the Bani Israel are very similar to the mushrikun in how they treated their Prophet. تَشَابَهَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. Alike are their hearts. And so we have this even in other verses of the Quran, this fact that the prophets of Allah were rejected at times, many times, because of this kind of arrogance. That the people that the prophets were sent to, they didn't want to accept this idea that the prophet is somebody special. They said, okay, if he's getting revelation, why can't I get revelation? God talks to him, why doesn't God talk to me? Such arrogance somehow has stopped these people from recognizing that there are different levels between the Holy Prophet and us. Is a huge gap that, like, God can talk to him because of his level, because of his purity. But we can't, receive the wahi. The last verse of this page, it says, Inna arsalnaka bilhaqqi bashiran wa nadira. We have sent you, the Prophet of Allah is being told, we have sent you as both a bearer of good news and a warner. Bashir is somebody who brings good news, and nadir is somebody who warns. Interesting point that I read in the tafasir is that you will never find the word Bashir in the Holy Quran except that it comes with nadir. So whenever the Prophet is called a bearer of glad tidings, he is also right away called a warner. But vice versa is not true. At times the Prophet is just called a mundhir, or maybe a nadir, that by itself he's just called a warner. It's an interesting point that maybe we can take a lesson out of. Okay, moving on to page 19. Again, this very strong stance that Muslims should recognize that لَن تَرْضَى عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا نَصَارِ. That these Yahud and Christians, they will never be happy until we follow their religion. We shouldn't think that, okay, they're going to listen, they're going to help us, they're going to follow our path, they're always going to be like helping us. No, they want, at least some of them are definitely like, steadfastly against us. And they want that we follow them. So this kind of, izzat and strength and identity, I think, is being strongly given to Muslims in these verses of the Holy Quran.
The word millat is translated here as religion, or it means their nation.
Yeah, it's a good point. تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. I didn't look into the word. But you're right, I would have thought it means something like that. Ayin, it says in Farsi, which means religion more. Maybe it can be used in the meaning of religion. Yeah. Yeah, this one doesn't have it. Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay. Then there's something about how those people who truly, those people who we gave the book to, yet they read the book or they follow the book. Tilawa has that meaning of reading and also following. Okay, so الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابِ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ. Those people we gave the book to, they follow it as it ought to be followed. Apparently, this is now a reference to those Ahlul Kitab who accepted Islam. There were numbers of Ahlul Kitab at that time. For example, when Ja'far ibn Abi Talib returned from Ethiopia to Medina, there were Ahlul Kitab who had accepted Islam in Ethiopia who came back to Medina with him. Apparently, this verse is referring to them. Then we have a verse that is exactly a repeat of a verse we had like 10 pages earlier. يا بني إسرائيل اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم وأني فضلتكم على العالمين. That, O Bani Israel, again, Allah is telling the Bani Israel that remember these favors that I bestowed upon you. Okay, now from this halfway through page 19 till like towards the end of the next page, it's a story of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. So this was the last of these kind of overall big topics that I mentioned to come up in these 5 pages. Prophet Ibrahim, of course. Yes.
Before you transition to that topic, just a question on the reference to how they were preferred over other nations.
Yeah.
Comment on that?
Definitely, that's the case, that like they were given so many prophets of Allah and Allah showed them so many miracles, all those stories that we read in the earlier pages of this surah. So it's a reality as to why it was the case. Maybe because they were somehow followers of Allah, they were children of prophets, they were tested a lot. But at the same time, they, in return, many of them repeatedly disobeyed. This idea that, justice means equality is definitely not the case, right? Like, if we look at our own, like, people we know or like the world around us, not everybody is given the same opportunity in their lives, physically, intellectually, spiritually even. But God will judge everybody based on what was given to them. So to say that they were given more of a favor is not against the adalat of Allah. Okay, so now from verse 124 onwards, it talks about Nabi Ibrahim. Just a few points about this. So Nabi Ibrahim, of course, is a very, very important person in the days of Hajj and Eid al-Qurban. We always remember his sacrifice and his tests that he went through. His life is a like epitome, like the prime example of submission to Allah. If we just think of all the tests he went through, we would appreciate how difficult his life was. And apparently this is what is being referred to. وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبَّهُ بِكَلِمَاتٍ. Kalimat means tests over here. Literally it means words, and that's why even in the English here it says God tested Abraham with certain words. But apparently what is intended is tests. Tested, ibtala. And so basically after a certain point, maybe so when he was younger, he was thrown into the fire, he left Mesopotamia, he went to Palestine, and then, he finally at a very old age, he had a child. Then he was told to take that child with his wife and leave them in that barren land of Makkah. So all these were tests that he went through. Finally, the time came that Allah said, Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama. Now I am making you an imam. Okay? And then, this is very interesting, that he prayed for his progeny. He said, oh Allah, what about my children? Will they also have this lofty position of imamah? And Allah tells him, La yanalu ahad al-zalimin. That this position of imamah is not for somebody who is a zalim, somebody who is an oppressor. So as Shias, we try to take lessons out of this in imamah, that imamah, first of all, is given by Allah. It's not just anybody's choice. Allah says, Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama. And then Allah says that only those people who are not zalim can be an imam. What does that mean? Ibrahim wouldn't be praying for an evil person from his progeny. He would be praying for the good people from his progeny. But even from amongst those good people, Allah is saying that no, some of them who are zalim means that maybe they did like the smallest of sin, smallest of dhulm, they are not qualified to be an imam. So this is one of the verses that we Shias would present to somehow claim and prove the matter of ismat and infallibility of our imams. An imam means like something, that is like a leader. Literally, it means a leader. And so apparently it has this meaning that is beyond prophethood over here. A prophet is somebody who brings the message of Allah, but an imam is the leader of society who implements the law of Allah on the earth and who has that job of actually, taking people towards Allah, spiritually guiding them.
I have a question.
Yeah,
The
sure.
Bani Israel, are they the progeny of Prophet Ibrahim? Are they
Yeah,
considered?
through Yaqub.
Okay. Is this the fact that Allah says that they have chosen them or prioritized them, that have anything to do with the du'as of Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Ibrahim, that just comes after that explanation?
Yeah, maybe. I haven't heard it, but it makes sense. Definitely makes sense that he prayed for his progeny, so maybe that's why, Mazahir, you got an answer to your question. Okay, in the interest of time, we'll just quickly finish the next few verses as much as we can. And then it's talking about how the house, referring to the Kaaba, was made to be a sanctuary, a place of mathabah. Okay, here it says place of reward in this English translation. But what I saw was that no, it doesn't mean reward, it means a place of return. That people, by going there, they return to their fitrat, to their initial state of purity. And then there was this place called Maqam Ibrahim, the same place where we try to pray namaz after we do tawaf in Mecca. We have to pray namaz close to that Maqam Ibrahim. It was apparently a place where Ibrahim a.s. himself stood right there. And he symbolically called people towards Hajj. Allah told him to do that. Then Ibrahim and Ismail were commanded to purify that place, to clean that mosque. And then in the next verse, as the sister said, there's this dua that Ibrahim is praying for, that Makkah be a safe place and the people who believe in Allah in this land be given special sustenance from Allah. Then in the next page, verse 127 onwards, again it's continuing the story of Ibrahim and how him and Ismail, they built the Kaaba. Apparently they rebuilt it. This is an interesting point, that the Kaaba was there from the time of Nabi Adam. We can show this in the Quran even, that when Nabi Ibrahim, he left his son Ismail there, he did a dua to Allah saying, "Oh Allah, I'm leaving my son close to your house." So even before Ibrahim, it was considered the house of Allah. But Ibrahim and Ismail, they rebuilt that mosque, Masjid al-Haram, the Kaaba. And then there's this dua where they're praying for themselves and doing tawbah. And then they're asking that Allah appoint, send a prophet in this land or from these people. Yeah, again, it talks about how Ibrahim was somebody who had totally submitted to Allah. إِذْ قَالَ لَهُ رَبُّهُ أَسْلِمْ, Allah told him, submit, and he said, I have submitted. أَسْلَمْتُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Definitely, this is a very, very high level of submission that we're talking about, that his entire existence, he had given it to Allah. Whatever Allah wanted, he was ready to carry out.
I have a question. Sorry.
Let me just end, inshallah, then I'm around if anybody has any questions. It's 9 o'clock, we'll end with that, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi wa tahirin.